it's Jennifer McGuire, and thanks for stopping by. Today I am actually going to show you 3 cards in this video, all using a pattern paper that I created myself with stamps and heat embossing. So before we get into making the 3 cards, let's go ahead and create our own pattern paper. Now this is a great way to use up those tiny little images that you get in all the stamp sets that you may have. I'm using 3 different stamp sets from Lawn Fawn from their newest release, and all 3 of these have these great tiny little hearts and stars and flowers, and I'm going to take those and use those to create my own pattern paper. There's lots of excellent images on these stamp sets, but this is a great way of getting more from the stamp sets that you invest in. So I've collected all these tiny little images, and I'm going to set the stamp sets aside. Now I have a piece of cardstock here, just green cardstock, and I'm going to take a collection of a few of these tiny little images and mount them onto a small acrylic block. You can do it however you want, but I'm kind of spacing them out so that I can have a kind of random looking pattern on my final paper. I'm using some embossing powders from Wow, and I love these because they come in a ton of colors and they're very inexpensive. I like the opaque ones and the metallic ones, and that's what I'm using here. The glitter ones are fun too, but I'm not going to use that on this card. So I have some scrap paper handy, and also these mini spoons. These mini spoons are key to working with embossing powders and keeping them from creating a mess. So I'm going to go ahead and use my anti-static embossing tool on here just so that I don't get powder where I don't want it. Now I have those randomly arranged stamps on there. I'm going to stamp them with Versamark all over my cardstock. Now you'll notice I just kind of twist and turn. It really doesn't matter how you land these stamps on your paper. I just try not to overlap a stamp image with one that's already been stamped, just to keep it nice and clean. Now here I only did stamping on half of my cardstock just to make it easier to put the embossing powder down, but you could save time by doing the whole sheet if you wanted to. Now I'm scooping out a little embossing powder and tapping with my finger to knock it off onto the paper. Now this is just a way to kind of control the mess of embossing powder. You could just take the jar and just dump it right on there if you want to. I found that the glitter trays or embossing trays that catch these don't really work really well for me. I find that this is my best method, and the spoon just helps me kind of aim where I put it. And if you're trying to do multiple embossing powders on one piece, the spoons are just wonderful to use. And I'm going to tap it all off on some scrap paper and then scoop it back into my jar. I will wipe up all the stray embossing powder on my work surface with a piece of Swiffer dusting cloth, which I'll talk about in a moment. So now we're just going to go ahead and heat zap this, or use my heat gun, heat zap, to go ahead and melt all this embossing powder, and you'll see that vibrant red that we get on the green cardstock. Now I'm going to go ahead and do the other half. Again, I could have done it all at once if I wanted to. Now, this is a process that takes a little bit of time. It took me about 15 minutes to make this piece, but I'll be able to use it on 3 cards, actually 4 cards if I wanted to. You could do several pieces at once if you wanted to, or use a larger piece of cardstock. So I've done the same kind of red color on this side. Now let me talk about that Swiffer dusting cloth. Swiffer dusting cloth is a disposable dusting cloth meant to clean the floors, but I cut it into small pieces and I use it to clean up quickly embossing powder and glitter. Look at it, picks it all right up. You don't have a mess that you kind of have to scoop away. It just holds it, and it's a great way to make cleanup faster. Okay, so now I have a few more small images on my mount, but look at, I only have 4 this time, so I've kind of gone down in the number of images because I need to make this fit in what I already have. But if you notice, it fits pretty easy. You just kind of rotate it and find a spot where you can stamp it. And I'm going to go ahead and stamp this with the Versamark ink all over the paper. Then I'm going to go ahead in and add some more embossing powder, but in a different color. This time, by the way, I did the stamping on the entire piece and then added the embossing powder just to try to save time. I encourage you to kind of play around and figure out what's best for you, to do a bunch of stamping at once, or to pour the jar on, or to use a little spoon. It just depends, and I wanted to show you a variety of ways. So after heat zapping this, it's time to move on to the next color. So I've put a few different little images in a different arrangement here. I'm using 4 again on my acrylic mount, and you can see you can still stamp this many at once. It would take forever to stamp all these images individually, and by just doing this and kind of fitting in your images where you can, it really saves quite a bit of time. You don't have to do heat embossing too. You could just stamp on white cardstock with colorful inks, but I love the look of a bright colored heat embossed image on a dark color cardstock. I just think it's beautiful. So now I have 3 images because I'm starting to kind of find a smaller amount of space that's left showing that I can stamp in. So I'm kind of moved down. I start with 5 images and I kind of move my way down each time I add more. So this time it's just 3 images mounted at once, and I'm going to add some orange embossing powder. Now I'm down to 2 little images on there, and I'm just kind of squeezing them in wherever I can find, and I'll add yellow embossing powder this time. Now once you're done, if you find little holes where you want to fill, you can just go back with 1 image or 2 put close together and fill in those spaces. But if you look, by doing the random stamping that I did, I pretty much covered the whole piece, and I have my own kind of pattern paper with that fun raised color on top of that green background. So now that we have our own pattern paper created, I'm going to show you 3 cards that you can do with it. And I'm going to kind of go through them fast to keep this video a little bit shorter. This is the first one. I actually did some die cutting along the edge of a piece of cardstock and put the pattern paper behind it. Now, if you don't want to take the time to create your own pattern paper with your small little stamp images, you could always just use some store-bought pattern paper too. So I have a piece of white cardstock that's 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. I'm going to use my pencil and my T-ruler to draw a line across this. I'm going to use this thanks die, and I want to make sure I have enough room, so I was just putting it there temporarily. And I'm going to go ahead and do some partial die cutting here. This is a very easy technique, and I promise to show this again in a future video. Now I found this thin painter's tape, and I love this because it's great for holding dies in place as you run it through your die cut machine. I am head over heels in love with this scripty thanks from Lawn Fawn. I think it is just perfect. And what I'm going to do is overlap this just a touch with my line. So you see just parts of the bottom of the letters is over that pencil line. So I'm just going to go ahead and tape that in place and just make sure you have a little bit hanging over that pencil line. Now what I'm going to do is position this between my plates so that it only die cuts above that line. So I'm going to go ahead and line up that pencil with the edge of my cutting plates of my die cut machine. So if you look, that pencil line lines up with the edge of my cutting plates. This ensures that it only cuts what we squash between the plates. So only to the left of that line that you're seeing here. So I'm going to tape this in place just to make sure it doesn't shift, put my cutting plate on top of it, and run this through my machine. Anything to the right of that pencil line won't cut. So the bottom points of this thanks greeting will actually stay intact with the cardstock. So it's better to see it after you're done to help explain it. So I'm going to go ahead and remove my tape here. Painter's tape is great for this because it usually doesn't rip your paper if you're careful. And you'll see that the die cut through above the pencil line but not below it, so it stays connected. So now it's time to go ahead and cut along that pencil line. So I have my cutting mat out, my T-ruler, and my craft knife, and I'm going to cut around the word thanks but not across the word thanks so that the words is connected to that white part on the bottom. So I'm cutting along the pencil line that doesn't overlap with the word thanks. So the top piece will come off, all the little inside pieces will come off, and you have the word thanks kind of hanging off the top of your white cardstock. You could just cut a piece of white cardstock and just glue the thanks die cut on there, but I love the look of it being connected like this. I just think it's really cool to have a die cut along an edge. Okay, so now it's time for our pattern paper. I'm just going to cut a small piece because we don't need a big one and glue it towards the top of a note card. And I'll save the rest of that pattern paper for the other 2 cards. So I have this glued across the top of a note card, and I'm going to put a bunch of foam adhesive on this die cut piece that we created. I'm cutting super thin pieces here to put along the back of the letters on thanks so that it just has a little bit of support. You could skip this and just kind of let it float up there if you wanted to. It should be fine for serving its purpose. And then I'll use some large pieces of foam tape to cover the back of the rest of this piece. Now I'm going to stick this onto my card, and there you have it. That's all you need for this one. It's very quick and easy. Now, I'm not good at just leaving a simple card alone. I always got to stick some stuff on it. So I decided to die cut some tiny little hearts and cover them with the same embossing powder that we used before, and I'll show you how to do that at the end of this video. But I'm going to just use a little bit of my multi-medium here to glue those little hearts on. Now, the way I put adhesive on the back of these tiny little things is I smear some of the adhesive onto my craft sheet. I use my quick sticks, which has a sticky end, to pick up the little die cuts, and I just dip them in the adhesive and then put them onto my project, and that will hold on there tight and I won't have to worry about them falling off. But again, I'll show you how to create those colorful die cuts at the end of this video. So there we have the first card. I'm rushing through these. I want to make sure we get them all in one video. I love the design of this, and I promise that I will do more videos on that kind of partial die cutting in the future. Now the second card, this one is really fast and easy. Lawn Fawn has recently come out with some incredible alphabet and number dies. You can see them here. I like that they're nice and large, and it's a font that could go either cutesy or classic. So I've taken out 19 because my oldest stepdaughter will be 19 very soon. And I want to do a bunch of white numbers in the background and then do 19 in the colorful pattern paper. So I have 2 pieces of white cardstock here, and I'm just going to cut a bunch of numbers from this white cardstock. I'm doing 2 sheets at once just to save the time, and these dies will cut through both layers. So now that I have a bunch of white numbers, I'm going to go ahead and die cut my 19. I'm doing it in the corner of my pattern paper because I took a lot of time to make that pattern paper. I'm going to conserve the rest of it for other projects. Now this card is really easy to pull together. I'm just going to temporarily adhere this 19 down here in the bottom corner. I actually want to go back and put some foam adhesive behind it, but I'm not sure if I want to do that yet. So I'm just kind of putting it down to see. So once I have that number in place, I'm just going to start randomly gluing some of the numbers around it, some of the white numbers. Now I'm putting this on with glossy accents because if you put like any kind of like dry tape adhesive behind it, it might peek out the side, and this is white on white and you don't want to see the adhesive around the edge. So glossy accents is great for adhering paper, and you don't need a whole lot of it, just a tiny little bit. By holding the little number die cuts in my tweezers, it's so much easier to put the adhesive on the back and quickly add it to the card. It doesn't take much time at all. So now that I've covered my entire card, all that open white on white is covered, I'm just going to press that down and then cut off anything that's hanging off the edge with my scissors. I love these long Fisker scissors for this because you can quickly cut things right off the edge of a note card. So now that I've done this, you can see that tone-on-tone white in the background. I just love that look. But I see that my edges aren't very smooth. This is a trick I do often. I take a sanding block and kind of rub the edges, and it just kind of rounds them off and smooths it. So all those little numbers that are cut off the edge end up a little bit smoother, and we don't have to worry about them hooking on something and falling off. So there we have the background. Now I wanted a greeting on this, just a small little happy birthday message. So I'm taking this stamp from one of the old Lawn Fawn sets. It's a curved image, but I'm just stretching it and mounting it straight onto my acrylic block. And I'm only inking up the word happy birthday with Versamark ink. Then I'm using my embossing powder and a spoon and tapping it on. And you can see how you end up using such little embossing powder. You can control it better with the spoon. Now I decided I wanted to add my 19 with some foam tape after all, so I'm cutting little thin strips as I did before and placing them behind the little die cuts. Cutting little strips like this is so easy to do and a great way to pop thin die cuts. So after adding the 19, I'm going to put some foam tape on the back of that happy birthday also and tuck it to kind of come out from the side of the 19. So these alphabet dies and these number dies are great for kind of personalizing a birthday card. So now I did die cut some little hearts to put on this, and this is the same way I did the card earlier. What I do is I just die cut them from white cardstock and I put them on the sticky side of some painter's tape. Then I press Versamark ink on it. Then I go in and just add a little bit of embossing powder, controlling it with my little spoon and tapping my finger, and add a little bit of powder to each of the hearts. This is a great way to quickly color each of these hearts with a different color embossing powder without taking much time. By putting these onto the sticky side of this tape, I can hold them in place, and now I can pick up that tape and heat them without having to fiddle around with those tiny little die cuts. So there we have 3 little hearts that I added that have been covered with embossing powder to perfectly match the numbers that we created from the pattern paper that we made earlier in the video. Very easy to do, and you could do alphabets on here. You can do anything you want. So now the third card. This is the easiest, and I actually didn't walk through the steps just to save time because it's pretty obvious. I just cut a remaining piece of that pattern paper that we created and glued it onto the card along with a cardstock strip. I also stamped some greetings on here from one of the new Lawn Fawn sets that happens to be my favorite. It's called Chit Chat, and I think this stamp set is fantastic because you can use these little messages with any kind of critter stamp or little girl or little boy stamps that you may have. Here I didn't even put any critters on the card. I just did these speaking bubbles as a way to kind of add something fun to that little bit of pattern paper. Super quick card, didn't take any time at all because I have that pattern paper already created, and I still have some more that I could use on a future card. So there we have 3 cards that we made using a pattern paper that created ourselves with some small little images and some embossing powder. I'm in love with these new Lawn Fawn stamp sets and dies, and I hope you like them too. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.